Hello, everyone. I am so excited to have Mike Domitrz on the show with me today. Mike is a real champion for women. And, in this day and age, in recent weeks especially, oh my gosh, this national discussion about Me Too has bubbled up to the surface again. And Mike is here to talk about it with me. You don't want to miss this episode. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Devin.
It's a pleasure. Now, Mike, I think before we go too far, you and I need to just address the irony of two guys sitting around talking about Me Too. And I'm conscious of that. I'm sure you are. What's your take? Is it appropriate for men to be talking about Me Too?
Well, it's actually essential that we're all talking about Me Too. Here's really a key element, and I know in the intro you mentioned that we stand up and speak for women. What's also important for everyone to know is we stand for all genders, all sexual orientations, all identities. And we're all part of this conversation. When you look at who the perpetrators are, who the predators are, we have to talk about all genders, and we all have to look at how we personally are involved in this discussion, in this crime, in the culture that has enabled it to occur over thousands of years, and our roles. So therefore, we all need to be having the conversation.
Excellent. Now, Mike, I appreciate your insights. You've been working at this now for decades. And so, you were doing Me Too before Me Too was cool, if I can be so crass. But what is it about the culture that has allowed these patterns to develop where women tend to be victimized? And then we created a culture where they don't always feel safe to talk about when they've been sexually assaulted. Let's talk about culture.
We're going to go right into that. And I know you didn't mean to do this at all, but it's a good example, so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to use it.
Please use the example.
When you said when Me Too movement wasn't cool. So even a little comment like that can seem harmless, and you caught it right away. You said, "Oh, that could sound crass."
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a campaign versus a reality. So one thing that we help people understand is that Me Too is not a phase. It's not a moment in time. It's a historical reference point. Now, what I mean by that is this has been happening forever. This has been a part of our history forever. Now we are simply having the reckoning of acknowledging on what level, on what frequency, on what volume level people have been experiencing this. Therefore, it's not going away. Me Too is not going to be gone in a year. It's not going to be gone in 10 years. I wish it was, because that means we would have solved the problem. But this is so deep culturally that we're working our best right now, let's say in my lifetime, where I can look at 30 years ago, we were here struggling, and now we're here. But the goal is to get all the way to here to elimination. So maybe in my lifetime, we get to here. Maybe we get halfway there. That would be a wonderful achievement to get halfway there, because we can get the rest of the way in future generations. But that's really important for everybody listening to understand. This is not a moment in time where, oh, look at what's happening. Me Too. Me Too's always been here. The difference is survivors haven't been supported and been given a safe environment to come forward and say Me Too. And that's what's significant, is that all survivors, male and females, and all genders, all identities, are recognizing, hey, this is a place where I can feel safe. Now, as I say that, with what's happening in the news and what has been happening in the news, both politically and others, that is having good and bad effects, because there are survivors starting to think, this is triggering, this is harmful, this is painful for me to watch. So even though I feel supported over here, I feel I'm being harmed over here. And it makes it very difficult.
Mike, as we look at the context of the Brett Kavanaugh appointment to the Supreme Court, we see a couple of things developing. One of them is a discussion around reluctance to come forward and acknowledge or report sex crimes. Why do you think that is across genders?
Well, there's a multitude of reasons. There's no one. And that's what happens a lot of times, TV or news. They're like, what's the one reason people don't come forward? There's literally an unlimited number, because every survivor has different experiences. Sometimes during this case, survivors have said, I remember every detail of mine. How can this survivor not remember every detail of theirs? And that's legitimate because that survivor, that's how their trauma occurred. They're able to remember every detail. But other survivors will say, no, I don't remember a lot of the details from mine because the trauma affected me differently. And so my memories are working differently than this other survivor's trauma and how it impacted them. So every survivor's experience and how trauma impacts them and how sexual assault impacts them can be different. So the reasons survivors may not come forward can be different for every survivor. Reasons can include anything from, if you've watched how sexual assault's been discussed over decades, you often see survivors come forward and then people almost interrogate the survivor on why they didn't come forward and then interrogate them on why they made the decisions they did that night, why they didn't do this, why they didn't do that. And so many survivors start to self-blame because they see society blaming victims, they think, or survivors. They think, well, I must have done something. That's what society says. So there's self-blame and there's self-guilt that can exist. Other survivors may not have the self-blame and self-guilt, but they may fear the judgment that others will place upon them for the decisions they made. Others could think, well, what's the good of coming forward? Every time I see somebody come forward in the public eye, it doesn't seem justice ever happens, or that it's very rare that it happens. So why would I go through this incredibly painful, traumatic experience of discussing it now openly with the world? And then the others, it might be, how will this hurt my family if they find out? How will this hurt my loved ones if they find out? How could this impact my career, depending on what you do for a living? All of these possibilities, and these are just this is tip of the iceberg of all the possibilities. So there's so many different reasons a survivor might not come forward. Another one we didn't mention could be repressed memories. In other words, due to the trauma, their memory system has actually shut down those memories. 30 years later, something happens in the news that triggers it, and now it's all flooding back. And now you're realizing, oh my gosh, this happened to me when I was 10 or when I was 22 or when I was 30. And it's all new, even though it happened 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's really complex, and I appreciate you helping us understand all of those issues. One of the things that concerns me that's coming out of the Kavanaugh crisis is the president's remarks that he worries about young men today having to live in a world where women come forward and report these things, or in his mind, apparently, make them up. What's your take on that? Does that concern you?
So it's not just the president. I want to be very clear here for everybody watching and listening. I hear that all the time from people of all different backgrounds and demographics that, what about our boys? I hear this from parents of boys, and I'm a parent of 4 adult men. Are you scared for your sons? And here's the reality. You should be no more scared for your sons today than you were 2 months ago, than you were 20 years ago. When people say, I'm scared for our sons, that they're going to be falsely accused, it implies that false reports are soaring and they're happening all over the place. When reality says there's nothing true to back that up. Nothing. In fact, when you look at statistics of false reports, of those reported, the highest percentage any research can show is between 3 and 10% false reports of those reported. But keep in mind, only 1 in 3 are reported. So if we have 100 reports of sexual assault that are reported, that means actually 300 cases occurred. And at highest, 10 were false reports in these numbers, right? 300. So you are talking 3%. 3% at the highest level of false reports. The difference is those 3% get all the news coverage when they happen. So we have a 97% versus a 3%. So if we're saying we need to talk about false reports, yeah, we should talk about them at most 3 minutes to every 97 minutes we talk about actual assaults. The problem is that's not what's happening. So there's perception that it's dangerous for boys, that it's dangerous. And I've heard some people out there say, well, I know a lot of people that have been falsely accused, to which I honestly ask, who are you hanging out with? You ask most people, how many people do you personally know that have ever been falsely accused of this crime? Most people are like 0. Yeah. In the media, yes, but somebody I know in my life, 0. And if they can think of any, it's 1. And how many people do you know in your life? Thousands. So this is incredibly rare. Now, don't get me wrong. For the one time it happens, it's awful and it's horrible. And nobody's downplaying that. But let's understand, 3 minutes to 97 minutes. That's how much time it should be getting at most.
What should you and I and everyone else who hears this be doing to make the world safer in this context?
Yeah, we need to start talking about what it really means to have respectful relationships. And that means in every realm, from the workplace to the home to sex and intimacy, in every element. It is the one piece missing. Companies and organizations, that's what we do. We work with everything from schools, from a 6th grader, to CEOs of organizations, to admirals and generals, because this is something that's got to go across our spectrum and have the conversation. An example, ask almost any parent, hey, when your child starts dating, do you hope they're given a choice before somebody does something with their body sexually or intimately? Every parent just about says, of course I do. Okay. What have you done to teach your child how to ask for what they want and don't want sexually when they choose to be sexually active? And parents are like, excuse me? What do you mean taught them? Well, how do you expect them to do the right thing with no skill set? Right. And that's been the problem with this topic. This topic across all areas over the history of time, it's treat people with respect and then there's no skills given. So we don't even know what it means when somebody says treat someone with respect. Everybody out there has a different evaluation of what that means, understanding of what that means. We need to teach skills. So if it's consent, I need to teach you how to ask for what you want. I ask you for a kiss, ask you what do you want to have and what do you want to do in bed together, so that it's mutual, not just that I'm trying to get you to say yes. That's coercion. That's getting your permission versus being mutual. We want it to be mutual. If you're in the workplace, one thing we challenge our audience is when working with companies, how many of your workplace relationships are mutually amazing? It's not even a term companies use. And so when we present this to them, they're like, whoa, mutually amazing relationships. Yeah. What does that look like in the workplace? So that's what we should all be striving for. How are we building mutually amazing relationships?
In the workplace, when you talk about a mutually amazing relationship, you're talking about something very different than a mutually amazing relationship in a marriage. What do you mean in the workplace?
Well, the key components are the same. So example, Devin, what would you think would be key to a mutually amazing relationship in a marriage?
Love and time together.
Okay, so care. You care for the other person. Yeah. Absolutely. How about communication?
Yeah.
Right? That's mutual. That not one's dictating the conversation all the time. It's mutual. How about I know what bothers you so that I don't trigger that behavior?
Yeah.
In a mutually healthy relationship, I know what triggers you. I know what triggers me, and I've shared that with you so that we can create an environment that stays away from triggers that cause harm for each other. Companies aren't having these conversations. If you ask most bosses, hey, what triggers your subordinate? They're like, what? What triggers them? Like, yeah, there's things you do that annoy them. And there are things you do that they feel disrespects them. Because this is true in all relationships. Do you know what they are? Because if you don't know what they are, that means you don't value the relationship enough to find out. And that's what mutually amazing relationships. I want to turn to people and go, what do I do that annoys you? What do I do that makes you feel not as valued as much or disrespected? And they say, oh, nothing. Well, it's okay, because I'd rather know if there's something. I want you to be able to say it so that I can make sure that I'm aware if I ever do it. I'll give you an example. I was once on a phone call with somebody that worked with me. And I was getting all excited and really passionate. As you can tell, I'm a high energy person. And she suddenly went, whoa, Mike, can you call me back in a minute? And I heard her suddenly tone just drop. And I'm like, whoa, something just happened on this call. Yeah. But I'm like, okay, want to respect your boundaries. I'll call you back in a minute, she says. A minute goes by, and I'm starting to think, what did I do? What did I say? 5 minutes go by, she's still not calling back. 10 minutes go by, she's not calling back. 20 minutes goes by, she calls back. And she goes, okay, we can continue. And I want to pause because I did something. I could feel that I did something by the way that happened. And that's my fault. That's not yours. But I want to know so I don't do it again if you're comfortable telling me. And she goes, Mike, when you got that excited, you got that high energy in you, I felt I was being bulldozed. And you didn't mean to bulldoze me. That's not what you were doing. That's who you are. You get excited. But because of my past history, when somebody does that, I feel disrespected and that I'm being run over. And I know you didn't mean that. No, you didn't mean that. But that's why I needed a break. And I said, and that's my fault for not knowing. Because I should have known your triggers. We work way too close to each other for me not to know what's going to make you feel disregarded, disrespected, or not valued as much. I should have asked you by now. That's what we're talking about.
Wow. You know, you are probably a really good husband after working on this for 30 years.
Keep in mind, I'm a human being, which means I still struggle with everything I'm discussing right now because we're human beings.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. We're never going to get even what we teach right. In fact, the more we teach it, the more we're aware of it, right? So the more I'm working with organizations, the more I have to look in the mirror and go, remember that now. You just said that today. Are you living that today? Right? We have to be authentic to our message.
Tell us just a little bit about, and I realize you could take an hour, but take 2-3 minutes and tell us about the programs you run for each audience. Because I know you've got online training, you speak, you do trainings. Tell us a little bit about what you do to help address this concern out there in the world.
Yeah, we have a program called Culture of Respect for corporations, associations, organizations, what people would call maybe the corporate world, that is doing what we just discussed. How to really create a culture within the organization. Right now, companies are afraid. CEOs are afraid. Managers are afraid that I'm going to say or do something wrong. And they're operating under fear. They're doing check the box kind of training to show we did something so we can't get in trouble. And what they need to be doing is looking in the mirror and going, how are we going to get ahead of this? How are we going to proactively transform our culture? And that's what we do. I provide a keynote that helps them kickstart that, so that they are not left behind. Because if you don't do this right, you're going to be left behind. And so you've got to create that culture of respect now. So that's what we do with corporations and organizations. And we can even provide them after we do the keynote, like video training that can continue the message throughout the year. Well, when we work with them, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that you talk about is this, or that I hear is that men are saying especially, they no longer know how to interact with women in the office. Do you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the common things you hear nowadays is, I'm afraid what I'm going to say in the office, I'm going to get in trouble now. To which you just pause and go, I appreciate that, but just think about that for a moment. What were you saying for the last 20 or 30 years that you weren't aware could have been causing harm?
Yeah.
And so I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to be aware. I don't want you to live in shame or guilt. I want you to be aware so you can change going forward. You don't need to censor yourself unless your self is being degrading or disrespectful or devaluing others. If you can understand how to thrive being you, doing that, you're not going to be in fear anymore. How can you be your true self, authentic self, that's focused by leading with respect? And everybody has a capability to do it, just about everybody. I mean, there could be a few mental health situations that would not be true of that, but just about everybody else can. We just have to learn that discovery of how to do that. And that's part of what we teach.
You've been at this a long time. What are you most proud of having accomplished?
You know, it's every day somebody comes up to you and shares in an hour that you had with them or 45 minutes you had with them, a major transformation that occurred for them. I don't cause that. They choose that transformation in that moment. We simply are a catalyst that allows it to happen, but they ignite that allows them some form of freedom or ownership. And what I mean by that is that could be anything from a survivor who comes forward who has never told a human being that this happened to them. Yesterday, it happened to me. I was at an organization and somebody came up and they wanted to pull me to the side and talk to me. And you could start to see the emotion. And they had just talked to the services that were available at the event for that crime, for sexual violence. And they were stepping forward and coming forward as a survivor for the first time, and then wanted to come over to me and say, I just did this. And I wanted to share I did this because I felt safe due to today's program to do this. The emotion I could see in them led to emotion in me. This is why we do the work we do. So there's that example. And then there's the person who says, hey, Mike, I saw myself in the character who was doing things wrong in your stories. I don't want to be that person anymore. I know that I can be better than that person. And now I know I have the skills how to do it. Thank you for allowing me to transform how I was presenting myself to this world. So those are two very different versions of having breakthroughs. But that's so, I mean, every time that happens, that's a memory of why we do this and is, just gets us more invigorated to keep rolling.
What's the most important lesson you've learned after 30 years of doing this?
The most important lesson I learned is I don't, and no one can, change anyone. I do not create change in my audiences. I don't. I'm a guide. I'm a guide that presents you some skills and tools that maybe you've never seen or heard before. And I guide in a way that allows you to have full ownership of it. Not me. You're the brilliant one. You know, you're so brilliant as an individual that I'm simply providing these things that you can insert into your life and change it at a whole nother level because you choose to. I end all my shows by saying today's been all about choices. And the next one, it's yours. Because who's going to determine what happens next. And I think that's the one thing we have to learn. If we're teachers, we're educators, we're parents, we're speakers, we're authors, we don't change people, even with all the influence we may have. They do. We can be incredible guides, though. We can be wonderful at trying to be a guide.
That's a really powerful lesson. Mike, I'm curious. You know, you have really persisted in doing this for a long time. I keep saying that, but it really struck me as I've been looking at your background and bio that this is not something you picked up after Harvey Weinstein got caught a year ago. You go way back. Why? Why on earth did you choose this path?
Yeah, I didn't choose it. This path chose me. I mean, in some way I chose it, but I did not plan to go down this path. I was a 19-year-old college student, raised in a very close-knit family of 3 older sisters, when I received a phone call that the youngest of those older sisters had been raped. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was outraged. I was furious. I was crushed. I was hurt. And over time, the person was caught and would go to prison for life, but that still didn't take away the anger that was inside me. It didn't make me feel better about what happened. And suddenly I heard a speaker on the topic when I was in college after this happened and realized, wait, could I use my voice to make a difference here? And while I'm angry at this rapist for what they did to my sister, the speaker made me recognize, what have we all been taught that's really messed up about consent? 30 years ago, if you spoke to a high school audience and said, can a person not of sound mind who's drunk give consent? The whole audience yelled, yes, of course. They said yes. That's where we were at the time.
Yeah.
Now you go into high school, every student knows, of course they can't. They're vulnerable. They're not of sound mind. They cannot consent. But 30 years ago, the society didn't act like that. We acted from a much worse situation as far as how we treated others, with total degradation. If you got drunk, it was pretty much whatever someone wants to do with you, they can do to you, which is horrible, of course, just horrific. Now we know that's not okay. So that's how the world has changed. The problem is our behaviors don't match our awareness. Awareness has gone up. Behaviors is not matching it. That's the next journey. That's what we're dedicated to doing, get those behaviors up there. But yeah, I started in 1991 speaking up. And, you know, it's funny, in 91, people said, oh, this is a hot topic because some news case had just happened. But what are you going to do in 2 or 3 years? And then in the mid-90s, I had to step away from it because I looked too young. I was 24 and I looked 16, so nobody would take me seriously because nobody was talking about it. Then came back in 2002 and we went full time and it really took off and people were like, well, it's a hot topic right now. It's going to go away in 2 or 3 years. And I kept telling them, don't you see? I hope it does. I hope I'm unemployed because there's no need for my work. That would be the greatest problem for me to have in my life. But here we are, 29 years later, and there are improvements, but we have a ways to go. And that's not discouraging. What we do is we focus on the improvements and know there is progress. And that's what's key here. We're making progress. And now let's just keep jumping that progress.
Mike, what's your superpower?
My superpower. I would say it's my ability to listen to those I work with. My whole perspective when I'm with an audience is for them to guide the conversation, even though I'm the guide. So I'm asking them questions that drive the conversation. My unique ability is that I create aha moments that uncover discoveries for others. So maybe that's my superpower. I do that by listening, asking questions, and then listening intently versus asking a question and already assuming where the conversation is going to go. I create discoveries and those aha moments by asking you questions, letting you answer them, and then going, all right, let's take a look at that. And then diving into that. So there's an exploration. By doing that, you, the person who answered the question, cannot get mad at me because it was your answer. It wasn't mine. So a lot of experts in the world come out and go, here's the problem. And the audience goes, how dare you say I have that problem? How do you know I have that problem? They become defensive. I say, hey, is this happening? And the audience goes, yes. Well, then they can't deny in 30 minutes when I say, is that a problem? And they say, yes. Okay. So you admitted you're doing this. You said earlier it's happening, and you're part of the it's happening, and it's a problem. We got to do something about this. It gives the audience ownership. So that's my superpower, is allowing them to realize they are the hero. They are the person we're there for. I'm not the hero. I'm not the person on stage going, look at me, I'm brilliant. I'm here to say, let's look at your brilliance and let's have an incredible conversation.
Brilliant. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for your powerful insights. It's been just a pleasure. Everything I hoped it would be in this discussion. Before you go, would you take just a minute and tell people how they can learn more about you, your work, your programs at Date Safe Project, and how they can connect with you personally?
Yes, they can they can find everything on our website. And they really have two options. If you really want to remember better, MikeSpeaks.com is super easy. Or they can go to datesafeproject.org. On there, at the lower end of the footer, you're going to see all our social media. So you can connect to me that way. There's a contact us button, so you can get a hold of us that way. There's a phone number, you can call us that way. And that's really the best way for people to reach out to us, is go to either MikeSpeaks.com or datesafeproject.org. You know, Devin, I didn't get to ask you, what's your superpower?
Oh my gosh. Tenacity. You are about episode 1010. I don't know how to quit. So yeah, that's mine.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that.
Mike, it's been a joy talking to you. Thank you so much for the time, and we wish you every success in changing this culture around the world that denigrates some human beings to less, so we could stop doing that.
Well, thank you so much for allowing us to have the opportunity to spread this message, and for all the work you're doing, Devin.
All righty. Let's do some good.